Did you know that 90% of people never finish a book they start? That's right, most readers will give up on a story in the first few chapters if it doesn't grab them. And what's worse? Over 70% of writers never finish their first novel. These shocking statistics aren't just numbers, they're proof that writing can be a tough game, especially if you're making common mistakes that turn readers off. So, what are those mistakes? What's really stopping writers from connecting with their audience? The truth is, many beginner writers make the same cringeworthy errors that are easy to avoid. In this video, we'll dive into 6 huge mistakes that could be holding you back from becoming a great storyteller. From boring beginnings to predictable plots, we'll uncover the secrets to capturing your reader's attention and keeping them hooked from start to finish. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to fix these mistakes and take your writing to the next level. Ready to avoid the traps that so many writers fall into? Let's get started. Chapter 1, the infamous info dump. Drowning your reader in details. As a writer, it's tempting to give your readers every detail about the world you've created. But if you're not careful, you might fall into the trap of the info dump. This happens when you pile on too much backstory, setting description, or character history all at once. The problem? Your reader gets lost in the details and forgets why they're even reading in the first place. It's easy to think you need to explain everything right away, but that's not how great storytelling works. According to author Stephen King, the scariest moment is always just before you start. The same goes for writing. The key is to create curiosity, not to explain every little thing. Instead of dumping information, try integrating it into the story naturally. Reveal details piece by piece, like puzzle pieces falling into place. J.K. Rowling did this brilliantly in Harry Potter. She didn't reveal everything about the wizarding world right away. Little by little, she let the readers uncover it alongside Harry. A good rule of thumb is the show, don't tell method. Rather than describing everything about your character's past, show how their past affects their actions today. Readers should feel like they're discovering your world rather than being told about it. This keeps them hooked, not overwhelmed. Think about your favorite books. The ones that kept you reading had that sense of mystery, right? You wanted to know what happened next, and the author kept giving you just enough to satisfy your curiosity. That's what you want for your readers. A great way to handle this is by using dialogue and action. Characters don't always need to sit down and explain their life story. Instead, you can hint at things through how they react to situations or how they interact with others. By being strategic with your details, you don't just avoid the dreaded info dump, you create a story that pulls readers in and keeps them engaged. Chapter 2, Flat Characters. Why your protagonist feels like cardboard. We all know a flat character when we see one. They're one-dimensional, predictable, and lack depth. But here's the thing, flat characters can kill your story. Why? Because readers connect with complexity. If your protagonist feels like a cardboard cutout, they'll stop caring about them. Character development is key to crafting a compelling story. Great characters aren't perfect, they're flawed and multi-dimensional. Think about Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. She's smart, witty, and a little prejudiced. Those imperfections make her relatable and real. A mistake many beginner writers make is thinking that characters have to be lovable or likable from the start. This couldn't be further from the truth. What readers need is a character who feels authentic, someone who grows throughout the story. Flaws are one of the best ways to give your characters depth. Think about Tony Stark from Iron Man. He starts out arrogant and selfish, but over time, he evolves into a selfless hero. It's that transformation that makes him memorable. But how do you develop these characters? Start with motivation. Why do your characters do what they do? What do they want, and what's stopping them from getting it? If you can answer these questions, you'll have a much richer, more engaging character. You can also give your characters conflicting desires. If they want two opposite things at the same time, it creates tension and makes them more interesting. Conflict isn't just for your plot, it's for your characters too. Another great tip is to give them backstories that influence their actions. Maybe your protagonist had a difficult childhood that makes them struggle with trust. Or perhaps a past mistake constantly haunts them. These details don't have to be revealed all at once. Drop hints as you go to create that layer of mystery. Remember, characters are what drive your story. If they feel real, your readers will follow them anywhere. Chapter 3, The Dialogue Disaster. When your characters sound the same, dialogue is one of the trickiest aspects of writing. It's easy to fall into the trap of having all your characters speak the same way. When this happens, your story loses its authenticity. Imagine reading a conversation where every character sounds exactly like the narrator. That's a dialogue disaster. Good dialogue should reveal a lot about your character without you having to spell it out. Mark Twain once said, "The difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug." The same goes for dialogue. Each word should matter. Each of your characters needs their own voice. Think about it. A soldier will speak differently than a scientist. A teenager will talk differently than an elderly grandmother. Their vocabulary, tone, and the way they structure sentences should reflect their background, personality, and current emotional state. One way to achieve this is by considering speech patterns. Does your character use short, blunt sentences or long, flowery ones? Do they use formal language, or do they speak with slang? These small choices create a unique voice for each character. Subtext is also important in dialogue. Often, what's not said is just as important as what is. When characters don't directly say what they mean, it adds depth to the conversation and keeps the reader engaged. Think of Sherlock Holmes. His dialogue often hints at deeper truths without directly stating them. In addition to making each character's voice distinct, pay attention to body language. Stephen King says, "Good writing is often about telling what isn't said." Body language conveys a lot of meaning. Maybe your character crosses their arms when they're upset, or avoids eye contact when lying. These subtle cues can make your dialogue feel more real. Lastly, remember that dialogue should be dynamic. It's not just about what's being said, but how it drives the story forward. A great conversation should reveal something new about the character or advance the plot. Don't let your characters sit around chatting aimlessly. Every line should have a purpose. If you're enjoying these tips, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more secrets to help you become a better writer. Chapter 4, The Boring Beginnings. Hooking your reader or losing them forever. Starting your story is like meeting someone new. The first impression is everything. If your opening is weak or slow, readers may not stick around long enough to see how good the rest of your story is. A boring beginning is one of the quickest ways to lose a reader's interest. To avoid this, your opening needs to grab attention from the very first sentence. According to Kurt Vonnegut, start as close to the end as possible. You don't need to explain everything about your characters or setting in the first paragraph. Instead, jump into a moment of action, conflict, or mystery. Think about the books or movies you love. What made you want to keep going? It wasn't a long explanation of the setting, it was the promise of something exciting, unusual, or emotional. A great opening establishes stakes. It gives the reader a reason to care right away. Take The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins as an example. The first sentence pulls us into Katniss's world instantly. "When I wake up, the other side of the bed is cold." This line creates a sense of loss, loneliness, and sets up the entire emotional tone of the story. Another technique is in medias res, or starting in the middle of things. This method drops readers into a scene already in motion. It could be a heated argument, a chase, or an urgent decision. The key is to make the reader ask, "What's going to happen next?" Don't be afraid to show conflict early on. Conflict drives your story. Even in quieter stories, some form of emotional or intellectual tension needs to be present. This isn't about physical battles but the inner struggles of the characters. But what if your story doesn't have a big action scene to start with? You can still hook readers with something intriguing. Mystery is a great tool. A question or strange occurrence can draw readers in, making them want to keep reading to figure it out. Remember, your opening sets the stage for everything to come. Make it count. Start with energy, curiosity, or a hint of mystery to create an immediate connection with your audience. Chapter 5, The Repetitive Ruts. Using the same phrases over and over again. Every writer falls into the trap of repeating themselves, especially when trying to create impact. But repetition can quickly become a crutch that weakens your writing. It makes your prose feel lazy and predictable. The key is to avoid using the same words or phrases throughout your entire story. It's easy to do, especially when you're in the middle of writing and just need to keep going. But according to author and editor Anne Lamott, almost all good writing begins with terrible first efforts. So don't let your first draft be your final draft. If you keep using the same descriptive words, your writing becomes stagnant. For example, if every character is always grinning or staring, your story feels flat. Instead, mix it up. Find new ways to describe actions, emotions, or settings. Not only does this keep your writing fresh, but it also helps create a unique atmosphere for different scenes. In addition, look for places where your sentences sound repetitive. Sometimes it's not the words themselves but the structure. If you start multiple sentences with the same phrasing, it can drag down the pace of your story. A great tool to combat this is a thesaurus. While you don't want to overuse it, a thesaurus can help you find new ways to express the same ideas. Just be cautious not to pick words that sound unnatural or forced. A synonym should fit the tone of your story. Strong verbs are another tool to avoid repetition. Instead of repeatedly using weak verbs like walked or looked, choose something more specific: strolled, paced, or glanced. This gives your writing more variety and makes your scenes more vivid. Most importantly, be mindful of overusing adjectives and adverbs. It's easy to rely on these, but often they only add fluff. Instead, find ways to show what you mean through action or detail. Chapter 6: The Predictable Plot. When your story is just too easy to guess, nothing turns readers off more than a predictable plot. If they can guess what's going to happen next, they'll likely put the book down and move on. A great story isn't just about where it's headed, but about the unexpected twists that keep readers hooked. One of the biggest mistakes beginner writers make is following a formulaic plot. It's tempting to stick to a tried and true structure, like the classic hero's journey, but if every story follows the same path, it becomes boring. Instead, embrace unpredictability. Think about George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones. Just when you think you know what's going to happen, he throws in a shocking twist that changes everything. Surprise is a tool every writer should use, especially when it comes to major plot events. To avoid predictability, layer your plot with multiple threads. Subplots, small mysteries, and character arcs that don't always align with the main plot will keep the reader on their toes. Every good story should have moments where the outcome is uncertain. Don't be afraid to break tropes. Tropes are overused plot elements, like the damsel in distress or the chosen one. Instead of relying on them, find new ways to turn these expectations upside down. Readers will be impressed by your creativity. Foreshadowing is another great tool, but use it wisely. Hints at what's to come can be a great way to set up twists, but they need to be subtle. If you make it too obvious, the surprise will be spoiled. Remember, your readers want to be challenged. They want to be kept on the edge of their seats. If they can predict the outcome of your story, they'll lose interest quickly. Use your plot to engage them, surprise them, and make them think. Great stories don't follow a predictable path, they take readers on a ride filled with unexpected turns, tension, and excitement. By avoiding these common mistakes, you'll be well on your way to becoming a better storyteller. Don't forget to hit subscribe for more tips and tricks on crafting the perfect story.